Perfect. See it now.
Hi, Paris Marx. Thanks for making time with us today.
Of course. Great to join you. Always nice to talk to a fellow Atlantic Canadian.
Yes. Where are you now?
I'm in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Oh, great. Um, I've long been an admirer of your work, but maybe we can just start by having you introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Paris Marx. As I mentioned, I'm from Newfoundland. I live here again now. Yeah, I write a lot about technology. I'm a tech critic. I think it's fair to say. I host a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. I also wrote a book called Road to Nowhere: What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About the Future of Transportation, and I'm working on a second one at the moment about data centers.
Oh, very good. We'll get into that. I understood, and perhaps I have this wrong, but I understood your entryway into Tech Won't Save Us, which everyone should listen to, was through the sort of car. Is that right? Can you explain that?
Yeah, totally. So I would say there were a number of like ways into it. Just about the criticism more generally. Part of it was that, I was interested in technology from a rather young age. Computers were around when I was young, and my mom was studying computer science, so it was pretty common to be doing things with computers and to be seeing that. Yeah, and so there was that interest, and I would say for quite a while I was kind of like a techno optimist of a certain sort. I was an Apple fanboy and all those sorts of things for quite some time. And I would say there were two things that really started to maybe change the way that I looked at technology. And one of those is, as you say, looking at transportation, looking at the car, and really seeing how the tech industry was kind of moving into the transportation space, was proposing all these new ideas for the future of transportation, whether it's self-driving cars or, of course, ride-hailing services like Uber. And they were talking about flying cars and all this other stuff for a while as well. And, for me, I I guess, I'm from a place, as you'll probably be familiar, that's very car dependent. It's hard to get around without a car. And so that was kind of like my experience of transportation for, the significant first part of my life until I started to see that things could be different in other different parts of the world. And so when I saw these tech companies kind of moving into transportation and making these proposals for what the future of transportation should be, and how supposedly self-driving cars and all this stuff were going to solve all these problems with the transportation system that's so oriented around cars. I was like, I don't think that actually makes a lot of sense. And so I did a master's degree where I looked into that, a master's degree in geography, and that was kind of like where my first book came out of. So that was one piece of it, right? Like I was really not satisfied with the ideas that these companies were putting out for transportation that seemed very much still oriented around the car, not really solving these problems when, I felt the data showed that we should be investing more in public transportation and denser communities and walkable communities and all that kind of stuff if we were really going to try to solve these problems. And then the other piece, just I guess briefly, is in the 2010s there was another kind of AI hype moment as well, right? Self-driving cars and AI and robotics were going to eliminate all these jobs. And for a while, I believed in that. In the early 2010s, I was like, oh, wow, this is coming. What are we going to do? How are we going to address it? And then by the time the later 2010s come around, it's like, oh, all those jobs were not wiped out, but all these companies have used technology in order to increase their leverage over workers and over the rest of us. And that has really had a lot of negative impacts. So it's kind of like those two things that really help to make me see technology in a different way, right? And the politics of technology and all that stuff.
I think we're something like 15 or 20 years into self-driving cars being two years away, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I think we're going to see the same sort of thing with AI. Well, AGI is imminent, and just will never can never happen. But I love your podcast, and I hope you don't mind me saying this because it's geeky in all the right ways.
Thank you.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I just obviously here I don't know that you had any sort of renown in the world, or no one knew who you were
Mhm.
before you started this podcast, and it's been received wonderfully.
Yeah, absolutely. I like there were some people who knew of me from my writing and stuff before the podcast started. The podcast I started in April of 2020, I believe. So like very early pandemic moments. I was like, we're all locked down. I know I'm not going anywhere for a long time. I know that, I was in Newfoundland at the time, so I was like, okay, there's not going to be many opportunities to like talk to people about these issues in my kind of day to day. So I figured it's probably a good idea to, I'd considered a podcast for a while, but I figured if I'm ever going to do it, like now is the time to do it so I can, have these conversations, so I can try to continue what I've been doing with the writing, which again, was looking at technology and the tech industry through a critical lens, but through a different medium now, through audio instead of through writing. And yeah, it's really been fantastic to see the response to it and how many people seem to, um, like learn from it and feel that I don't know, I guess it makes a difference and helps them understand like the world that we live in today.
I can tell you that your podcast has been the jumping off point for me to get more informed on a lot of these issues. I've followed up with some of your interview subjects,
Mhm.
some directly who I've spoken with. I spoke with Ez Istran last week, and
Yep.
others who I'm just following their work because you made me aware of it. So I really appreciate that. The
Thanks.
You've managed to get some great guests on, people doing really
Mhm.
good work. So it's been received positively in both the listenership and in the quality of your guests, and the broad variety of your guests. You're not afraid to go anywhere, really. You're getting into some arcane
No.
subject matters. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested in like history and more obscure things as well. Like I like to talk about, the day to day and what is going on like, in the present with technology and with these tech billionaires and all this kind of stuff. But I also really love to just dig into like where these ideas come from. Where does this industry come from? Where do these technologies come from? Because, for me, I feel like one of the things that the industry does really well is actually to try to like dehistoricize everything that they've done and all these technologies that we use. Because if we don't understand the history, then it's easier for them to sell us a fiction in the present that is never going to come to pass, right? But if we're better informed on where these technologies come from, the history of digital technology and technology more generally, and the history of like the ideas that guide the way that they think about these things, then all of a sudden it's not as easy for them to like kind of pull the wool over our eyes and to trick us about what is going on here. And so, obviously we talk a lot about contemporary things, but every now and then I like to kind of jump into the archive and really see where these things come from because I think it really helps to inform people, right?
There's a always a social context, and I think that's kind of
Mhm.
what I one thing I like about your show is that you know we're always people. We were
Mhm.
people 100 years ago. We were people 50 years ago. We're people now, and we'll be 50 years in the future. We'll be people, and we behave in the same sort of fashion.
Mhm.
And the tech, whatever the tech is, industry that they're trying to lure us into, is we're supposed to give up our humanity. And you always
Mhm.
bring it back to human values. And can you speak to that or?
Sure. I think it's just really important for me, right? I don't think that computers and machines should be making decisions over our lives. I think, humans are flawed in many different ways, right? But I think that, it's like humanity that really like adds value to our lives. And so, on the one hand, if you're thinking about like delivering public services to people, then ultimately, if a decision is being made over whether someone should have access to a service or not, a decision like that should be done by a human. And if someone is being denied something that they need or whatnot, then there should be a real reason for that, right? And it should be a human making that determination. And so there should be someone who you should be able to go to like appeal that decision or to understand why that decision has been made. And you could say the same for, management in a workplace, right? These companies have rolled out a lot of algorithmic management that makes it a lot more difficult for employees to have that like relationship to a manager, to understand the type of work that is expected of them, why there are certain targets, like all those sorts of things, right? If you think of like Uber, for example, where the drivers really don't have any kind of recourse to a human being, and there's more and more workplaces trying to roll that kind of thing out. If we look at like an Amazon workplace, for example, where there's a lot of algorithmic management in their warehouses. The kind of the control over the worker comes through the gun that they use to scan the different items. There's much less of a relationship to like a manager in the way that I had experienced when I was working in various workplaces. But then the other piece of that as well is like, if we think about what adds, I would say, vibrancy to human society and to our lives, it is the things that come of, human creativity, human interaction, the types of things that we do together. And it feels like these companies are very incentivized to actually try to replace a lot of those things that, you know, give our lives meaning with things that come from technologies that have very little meaning. And I think that, even though that might look good for them on like their balance sheets or their ability to increase the size of their companies or whatnot, it's actually very socially harmful for many of us, right? And so yeah, I guess that's part of the reason that it always comes back to like humans and humanity at the end of the day. I'm not like wholly opposed to technology, right? Like there are many things that I love about technology. The question is just like how we use it, how we implement it. And I think that these people are driven by values and kind of a vision of the world that is very anti-human in ways that I think the vast majority of people would not agree with.
Yeah, the whole project is dehumanizing.
Hmm.
And on the top end of it, it's these very obscenely wealthy men trying to acquire more power for themselves. We've seen this over and over again in history, whether robber barons that led directly to the
Hmm.
depression of the 1890s, the same sort of thing in the 1920s leading to the 1930s depression. Here we are all over again. And I don't see how we avoid a reckoning that is of that dimension again. But that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about AI. Um,
Sure.
uh, it strikes me, and I've written this many times, that the term AI is more or less meaningless because it means anything anyone wants it to mean. Um,
Hmm.
and when people start going off about AI, I just ask them, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" But I think that for shorthand, we can say that there's uh, a kind of techno trust us with this sort of thing, and
Hmm.
we'll run these large language models and generative AI programs. I think that's mostly what we're talking about when we're talking about AI. Um, where do you see what? Talk to me about the how they're trying to entrap us into this world. How do you see that?
Yeah. It's a big question, right?
Yeah.
I think in many different ways. So, the first thing that comes to mind to me is really just like thinking about the discussions that we're having in Canada right now, to bring it back like very, I guess, less abstract and more about what we're seeing. And, we have this government now that is really like pushing the notion of AI adoption onto not just the public service, but they want more private companies to be using it. They want the public to be using it. There's this notion that generative AI is going to increase productivity and that's going to be good for the economy and all those sorts of things. And it's interesting because just yesterday, as we're talking, there was a report in the Globe and Mail that showed that only 2% of Canadian companies that have invested in generative AI have actually had a return on investment. So I think it's like if you only care about the notion that like, this is good for the economy and there's going to be a return here and all this kind of stuff, like it's very not clear that that is actually going to be the outcome of what we're seeing here. And, part of that as well, like, I said that one of the things that really caused me to see technology in a different way was what happened in the 2010s, right? And that was a moment where, I don't know if people will remember, but there were all these reports that like up to half of all jobs were going to get wiped out because of AI and robotics and all these sorts of things. And again, like it really didn't come to pass, but it served as like a distraction because everyone was talking about all these jobs that were going to be eliminated and how we respond to it politically and whatnot. But then those companies went out and used those technologies in ways to improve it, to increase their power over the rest of society, over the workers, all those sorts of things. And so for me, when I see what's happening with, this latest wave of AI, I see on the one hand like a kind of narrative and an attempt to sell a vision for what AI could be. And that is either, the AI is going to be so wonderful, it's going to improve society in so many ways. We're going to have so much more access to healthcare and education because of chatbots and whatever. And then on the other end, there's like oh, but it could also like destroy humanity and enslave us or whatever, right? But it's like there's these two massive kind of science fictional visions to distract us from the reality of what we're actually seeing with these tools, which to me is the weaponization of the narrative of AI to justify laying off a lot of workers, whether that is in the private sector, as we've been seeing in, various different workplaces where you can justify using a chatbot over or an image generator over a human being, but also increasingly in the public sector, I would say, where if you look at, say, Mark Carney's budget, you can see that there are a lot of public servants losing their jobs and a lot of kind of wishy-washy language about how we're going to use AI to make things more efficient and whatnot, right? Um,
Do you
I
think
see you want to jump in.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you think Carney is really believes this crap, or is this just a cynical move on his part?
I think he's a believer. And I think you can go back to his book Values that was published a few years ago, where he's also talking about how AI is going to be like transformative and helpful and all this kind of stuff. Like I think he believes the narrative. You can also look at, he was on what was it, the board of Shopify, I believe, or was it Stripe or something like that? No, I think he was on the board of Stripe and he interviewed for a position at Shopify, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm mixing those up, but he has been in these rooms, he has been having these conversations, and to me, I do think that he's a believer that AI is going to be transformative. It's going to massively increase productivity. Like, I think it fits into the worldview that people like him kind of have for how these things are supposed to work. I think it's going to severely backfire on us. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't believe it, right? But then if you look kind of more broadly, again, like thinking about what the actual impact of these technologies is, to me, again, it's the impact on workers, which again is not so much to eliminate jobs, but to give employers the justification to lay people off who they might have wanted to lay off anyway and to cut costs and what have you. But then I think that there's a profound kind of social impact that comes along with this as well, right? We already talked about kind of the attempt to replace human creativity with outputs generated from a machine that have little kind of soul behind them, I guess you could say.
Right.
Um, yeah, but then the other piece of that I think is you know, a company like OpenAI has been pushing ChatGPT really hard for student usage. And we've been seeing a number of reports that, you're retaining less information, you are engaging in far less critical thinking, like all these sorts of things when you're using these tools. And, I kind of worry about where that goes if we have more people in society, not just students, relying on these tools that cause you really to think less about what is going on in the world. And then there's also like the broader, I would say, social impact where, we're seeing a growing number of these stories of people who, were dealing with mental health challenges, developed a dependency on chatbots. And of course, we know one of the usages that these companies are pushing it are like chatbot therapy and all this kind of stuff, which I think is really harmful. And, you have people who develop these dependencies and then end up having kind of, a mental break or, potentially go even further as a result of these dependencies. And I just think that these companies are like rolling out these tools, are trying to change society without thinking about the impacts that go along with it. And unfortunately, our governments are not saying, hold on here, let's make sure that these claims align with reality and that these tools are safe. Instead, they're saying, oh, maybe there's an economic return or a productivity benefit that's going to come along with this. So we can't possibly stand in the way, as we're seeing from AI Minister Evan Solomon, where AI rules are basically out the window and
Yeah.
it's just adoption, 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 right?
I think that even I mean, not to discount. I mean, it's part of the project is all this terrible stuff that you just went to
Hmm.
through. But I think in addition to that, even where it works, it just makes everything shittier. Like the chatbot experience is not a good experience for anyone uh,
Yeah.
to use, or on the other side, the people that have to work through it as employees. Um, writing, we're both writers.
Hmm.
getting your hands dirty, doing the work of trying to figure out what the hell you want to say and how best to say it is a messy, ugly process. And I get why there's an appeal of, oh, we'll just let the machine do it. But
Hmm.
you lose, um, first of all, the going through the work of writing helps you learn, but
Yep.
on the other side, you lose the soul. You lose a
Hmm.
point of a perspective, a point of view, a meaningful starting place for the reader. And I think it's the same way with you know the photographs, AI generated photographs
Hmm.
and film and all that. You can pretty much tell, you know, immediately like, oh, this is crap. And
Hmm.
there's a cheapening of the human experience through the use of all this stuff that I think is worth putting a pin in and saying
Yeah.
this is something here. Yeah.
To me, it also feels like an extension of something that has been happening for a long time, right? Like it's not something that just comes out of nowhere. Like, I feel like, and I don't know, maybe you'll have better insight into this than I would, just because I wouldn't have experienced as much of it. But I feel like, for several decades now, for I don't know, half a century
Are
really,
you calling me old?
very kindly, right? Just a bit older than me, that's all. But it's for half a century now, there has been this like ongoing effort basically to eradicate, like, I don't know, I feel like the social and community fabric of our societies, right? As a result of wanting to cut taxes and get government out of, more of our lives or whatever, it's kind of been like there needs to be this retreat. And as a result, kind of the social and community sector doesn't get the kind of funding that it would need to create these kind of like vibrant community spaces within so many of our communities, to bring people out, to bring people together. But also, you have the kind of erosion of unions, and unions also used to play an important role in kind of creating spaces to bring people together as well, right?
The pivot point on that, the breaking point on it was the Reagan Thatcher years,
Yeah.
where there's a direct line from that to our present situation. And you know, Thatcher famously said there's no such thing as society.
Hmm.
And that's the heart of it right there, is that it denies our connected humanness to each other.
Hmm.
And it's just on steroids right now is the way I see it.
Totally. And, so you think of like that project, right? And then you think about the arrival of these digital technologies in the 90s, but in the 90s, but really like their entrenchment in the 2000s. And what you have, like, to me, when I look at what so many of these companies have been doing, the goal is really to basically put technology between human interaction, right? So instead of me and you talking face to face, and of course, it's great that we can talk like this,
Yeah.
through a computer. Of course, we're not in person at the moment. We're doing this remotely. But in general, it's like every interaction needs to be mediated by a technology, because that is where you extract data, that is where you extract value. And so, my argument has long been that these technologies, and I feel like we saw it really on steroids, like in the first couple of years of the pandemic, is really to create a society where we're engaging with each other through platforms. We're making, kind of commercial transactions through platforms. Everything is mediated by the Googles and Facebooks of the world. And I just think that there's like a dehumanization that comes with that, right? You buy your stuff on Amazon and the stores on the high street shut down because they're not getting any business, or you order from the delivery app and increasingly that comes from a ghost kitchen, which erodes kind of, the restaurants and kind of, the even that kind of commercial part of the social fabric that was long there, right? And it just feels like there's this ongoing desire through the extraction of value by these tech companies to just erode like things that have been important to human life, to enjoying life, like to all this kind of stuff. And there's so many like, you know there's so many layers of it. You think about the fact people can't afford homes again because of changes that were done in the 70s and 80s that have now resulted in homes getting more expensive. You have these kind of community spaces that have been eroded. You have, again, even like the places where people would shop and hang out and stuff are increasingly privatized. And if they're not shutting down, then they're less friendly to be around, because you don't want people, kind of hanging around in a place. You just want them to buy and go away, right? And it just feels like the technology just feels like part of this much broader kind of, I don't know, hostile and anti-human turn that our society has taken, right?
Where do you see this going?
That's a great question. And I think it's hard to say. Like, I think if these tech billionaires and if these companies can continue to get their way, I think that it continues to go in a really harmful direction where there's more inequality, where again there's this growing drive to make sure that the things that make human life enjoyable, are basically eroded in favor of us relying more on platforms and consuming more, content through platforms and what have you. But then also like, I feel like you can't disconnect the technologies from kind of the social crises that are occurring more widely throughout our society, or the unaffordability of housing, the inequality, like we see in the cities that have large tech industries, the inequality increases, and kind of, social, so people who are experiencing difficulty in their lives end up getting, you see more homelessness, all this, and hunger and all this kind of stuff, right? We'd imagine that these are some of the richest places in the world. They're doing great, but instead it's like the opposite. Some people do really great, and a lot of people do really poorly from that. And so I just think like it, if anything, I hope that like the past year has really woken people up to just how harmful this industry is in so many different ways and how they're very much aligned with this political project that is against, against what a good life would actually look like for so many different people. When we see the billionaires being aligned with Trump and all this kind of stuff. And my hope would be that that would not just show the public, but also show like our political leaders that there's a real need to kind of break with this model that Silicon Valley has created, that kind of the neoliberal turn has created, and try to think about doing something differently. And unfortunately, I think that that's being squandered to a certain degree at the moment when we look at like at least political leadership in Canada.
Yeah, I personally I see the tech industry not just adjacent to or aligned with, but actually part of the fascistic
Mhm.
project. It's they're one and the same. Um,
Yeah.
so when I said that, and there's a great appetite for the kind of criticism that you're providing, as seen by your growing audience and the guests you're getting, and just I feel like there's kind of a counter narrative that's coming together. But on the other hand, whenever anyone questions, you know, the value of AI or tech, there's tremendous pushback. It strikes me as with anything else is if you're certain of your position, you're okay with criticism, right?
Mhm.
Or even welcome it because maybe it helps you clarify or improve the situation or whatever. But not when it comes to AI. If you have it, I was lectured at a conference last month. I'm terrible. Because I refused to have AI come into the newsroom, and I was told, well, this is just like I didn't want to go to the Walkman back in the 70s. And that was the comparison that was made. I'm still angry about that. But w- what kind of pushback are you getting personally?
Yeah, I definitely get it. I'm kind of used to pushback at this point.
Yeah.
People who have been following my work will know that I was a critic of Elon Musk long before it was popular to do so. So I got very used to having his fans come after me. Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I maybe it's just because of how I have my notifications set up on social media. I feel like I don't I don't see criticism or kind of the pushback as often. But again, when I do see it, it's just kind of par for the course at this point. I would say I think it's interesting to hear what you said about, getting that kind of criticism for not wanting AI in the newsroom, because I won't say where it was, but I was at a journalism conference in Canada, I guess a couple of months ago or something like that. And I was on a panel about AI. And it was, there was a union guy there and a guy from a great kind of publication in Canada, more independent one. But then it was me and basically someone who, yeah, I would say is a booster and kind of tries to sell AI solutions to newsrooms. And we had a pretty heated back and forth. I think we could put it that way because, I was not going to let that stuff stand. And the last thing I want is to see newsrooms, especially more independent newsrooms, buying into, this kind of bullshit and hype and all
I'm
this kind of
really
stuff,
sorry I
right?
missed that conference. I think
Yeah.
that's what it was. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, it's you know, I, I definitely get pushback, but I'm not concerned about it, right? And uh, I think when you're talking about the pushback, I think it depends on the level, right? I think if you're like in these kind of more corporate spaces, I think that you find a number of people who kind of want to adopt AI because that is, there's hype around it, but there is also kind of money sometimes. If you're showing that you're using AI and stuff like that, you can get money from some of these companies at times. They have different programs for that kind of stuff. Um, and I don't know, some people just like to ride the wave, I guess. But I feel like in my general life, um, and maybe this is like a self-selection kind of a thing, but in many cases it's just family members. It's not like the people that I choose to associate with, and these are family members who have, a whole wide range of beliefs. But I feel like in general, people are pretty skeptical of AI. I think that people still are hesitant to like fall for AI and to believe it's real and that sort of stuff. So I feel like I still see a bit of hope in seeing like how people in my everyday life associate with AI and how they feel about it. Um, and I saw that with crypto and stuff as well. Um, but that again, that doesn't mean that the industry isn't going to push as hard as it can to try to get us all to adopt it. Yeah.
Well, that was a great answer because I was going to ask you what you should tell people in terms of how to project themselves against this sort of technology. But you're telling me that your experiences, people are already going there.
I
It's
think
my
so. And like I think it has probably diminished a bit over the past couple of years. Like I think when it initially came out, I feel like people were really worried about falling for AI content, and now it is a bit more common and people are seeing it more commonly and engaging with it more commonly. And it also looks more realistic than it did a couple of years ago, unfortunately. So it can be harder to tell the difference. I still think that there's value in having those conversations with people though, right? Like even when it comes up, even when it's around, I have a friend of mine who sent me like an AI video on Instagram the other day, and I said very clearly, I was like, "Do not send me AI," and he was like, "Right, sorry, I shouldn't have done that." But I just think it's hard for me to say like this is what you should say to people so that they're against AI because I really think it's contextual, right? And I think it really depends on like, if you're talking to someone that you will know a lot more about them and what they care about and what they feel is important than I would know. And in that case, it's kind of like, what are the things that they might be concerned about when it comes to AI or that might resonate with them? Because generally I would say if you're a critic of AI, you probably have a bit of knowledge of the problems, right? And then it's like instead of just kind of spitting out all of these problems to this person, it's kind of like what is going to resonate with them? What is the thing that's going to maybe convince them that maybe I should be more skeptical or critical of
I
AI,
tell,
right?
I tell people who there's a certain kind of person who makes fun of AI by using AI and
Yeah, yeah,
and showing, oh, look at this ridiculous thing. And I'm like, oh, you just burned down a rainforest to make this point, or it's sort of like the AI
yeah,
criticism equivalent of a rolling coal, those big trucks that put out. It's like, what are you doing? I mean, you'll boycott Exxon or whatever, but you'll do this. I don't know. Um,
yeah.
yeah, so maybe we should just leave it there. I really, where can people find you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm these days on social media, I'm mainly on Blue Sky, but I do have accounts on a lot of the other social media platforms. Obviously the podcast is Tech Won't Save Us, and I have a newsletter that's been a little bit dormant lately because I've been writing a book, but it should kind of get some more energy to it in the next couple weeks, which is called Disconnect. But yeah, those are the main things I would say.
Yeah, well, again, I really want to thank you for the work you do. It's been really illuminating for me, and it's been, as I say, my entryway into a lot of other tech criticism. So I appreciate that, and I very much appreciate your time today. I know you're busy.
No, that's all good. I appreciate the invitation. As I said, it's always great to talk to other folks from Atlantic Canada, a place that's close to my heart. I haven't spent as much time as I would like in Nova Scotia, but I've definitely been to Halifax a few times and
Yeah. Well,
down
next
in
time you're
down near Wolfville and stuff like that, and up near Cape Breton. So yeah,
next time you're around, look us up. We'll show you a good time.
absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Paris, and we'll talk
Thanks so
soon.
much.